alternative electricity in the recent past. Many science fiction writers of the early and mid-20th century describe the creation of an artificial sun in their works. At the time, this idea was highly ambitious. Humanity has worshipped the sun since ancient times, associating it with God. Traces of this reverence remain in numerous forms, from cave paintings to the ruins of ancient temples dedicated to the sun. What motivated these writers to explore this theme? Unfortunately, we can no longer ask them, but in the digital age of the 21st century, it becomes increasingly clear that those science fiction authors may have been more like artists painting from reality rather than mere dreamers. Do you think such a thing is impossible? Yet, in our era, the most we have achieved is the invention of turbosolariums for artificial tanning, which themselves cannot operate autonomously. Serious efforts to create sun-like analogs have not succeeded. Scientists of all levels admit their inability to realize such an idea, despite advancements such as particle colliders. But what are these colliders for then? Mysterious light sources in historical photographs. Consider a photograph from 1901 in Adelaide, Australia, on King William Street. Atop the town hall, an unnaturally bright object, much larger than ordinary light bulbs, shines intensely. This object was still present in 1920 and later, though it appeared to be used less frequently. What was this artifact and where did it go? Fortunately, historical archives contain numerous photographs of this street from the 19th century. A photo from 1866 shows the same location. The town appears nearly deserted, resembling descriptions of medieval Rome where livestock roamed the streets. Yet, a similar bright sphere is already visible on the spire of the town hall, clearly distinct from the dome beneath it. By 1870, fences had been removed, but buildings remained abandoned, with their windows still boarded up. An adjacent building displayed a sale sign, indicating economic hardship. The sphere atop the spire was there before these unexplained events. It appears that the city had experienced a catastrophe, mirroring similar events in the Northern Hemisphere. The sphere remained in place until the latter half of the 20th century, before being replaced with a different object. What was its purpose and where did it originate? Surprisingly, this was not an isolated case. Illuminated spheres at world exhibitions. A similar glowing sphere appears in photographs of the 1908 National Exhibition of Brazil. Despite being a modern building of that time, constructed from scratch, it featured an identical luminous orb, shining brighter than the electric street lamps surrounding it. The exhibition grounds contain numerous such spheres. The absence of visible power lines raises further questions. Where were the electrical sources capable of illuminating so many lamps? There were no identifiable power stations to support such an electrical load. Yet these orbs glowed with an intensity unmatched even by modern floodlights. Similar spheres appeared in photos of the 1900 Paris Exposition. The Eiffel Tower, looking quite different from its modern form, also featured one of these spheres at its peak. After the exposition, the tower underwent reconstruction, and this glowing orb was never seen again. Why did these spheres suddenly disappear from existence, and why is information about them so meticulously erased? The answer is simple. These spheres were capable of both illuminating and generating heat autonomously, essentially serving as artificial suns. This very concept inspired numerous science fiction authors in the 20th century. Whether these writers had direct knowledge of such technology, or were simply fulfilling a cultural or social directive, remains an open question. The lost technology of helioids. These luminous spheres were known as helioids, and were remarkably simple to create. They were another legacy of past civilizations that survived into the 20th century. However, with the emergence of a new global technological paradigm, they became obsolete and were swiftly forgotten. Until then, they had been commonplace. Historical photographs of Europe frequently depict such spheres atop grand religious structures. They were typically mounted on spires, slightly elevated from the dome. Their primary function was to indicate that a temple was active, and they also provided ample illumination for public squares at night. Over time, this technology was transferred to entertainment venues and exhibitions. In early 20th century illustrations of Luna Park in New York, one can observe an intense beam of light emanating from the park's central tower. Photographs of the amusement park, however, do not show such beams, suggesting that these depictions were later altered or censored. A closer look at the tower's design reveals a large segmented sphere beneath the eagle sculpture at its peak. Evidently, by the early 20th century, the manufacture of helioids was well established. But what was their secret, and why does it seem lost today? The science behind helioids. The answer lies in their name, helium. Helium is one of the most abundant elements in the universe, second only to hydrogen. It is also the second lightest element, and has the lowest boiling point of any known substance. Importantly, helium is an inert gas, meaning it does not readily react with other elements. When an electric current passes through a helium-filled tube, the resulting discharge emits various colors, depending on the gas pressure. Typically, helium glows yellow, but as pressure decreases, the color shifts from pink to orange, yellow, green, and even blue. This shift is due to helium's spectral emission lines, which extend from the infrared to the ultraviolet range. Creating an artificial sun required merely filling a glass sphere with helium and applying an electric current. But how was this current generated, given that a temple spire has only one pole? Some properties of helium may be concealed from public knowledge. Official sources mention excimer molecules, short-lived dimers formed in excited electronic states. These molecules are the working medium for excimer lasers and lamps, which emit powerful ultraviolet radiation. Excimer lamps, which have only recently been developed in modern science, bear striking similarities to descriptions of helioids. They operate without a traditional power grid, instead relying on high-voltage electric fields, potentially similar to what temple domes generated naturally. Erased knowledge and historical cover. UPS. Helium's history is as enigmatic as that of Mercury. After Rutherford discovered that helium nuclei cause alpha radiation, its luminous properties were reinterpreted as part of nuclear explosions. This narrative mirrors the exaggerated toxicity of mercury, which ancient civilizations used freely. Our ancestors employed helioids extensively, even in domestic settings, without evident harm. In Russia, evidence of helioids is scarce. However, historical artifacts hint at their past existence. A French medal commemorating the capture of Moscow in 1812 depicts unusual structures atop the Kremlin's domes. When analyzed through the lens of helium technology, these structures resemble helioids. This suggests that, prior to 1812, the Kremlin may have shone brilliantly with artificial light. Another illustration shows a forked cross atop the Ivan the Great bell tower in the Kremlin, adorned with spheres, possibly helioids. After 1812, most cupola finials in Moscow were replaced with those seen today. Meanwhile, in the rest of the world, helioids continued to be used until the early 20th century. By the time of Nicholas II's coronation in 1896, helioids in Russia were only activated for special occasions. The notion that this illumination was powered by conventional electric generators is questionable, given that the entire city of Moscow was brightly lit. The removal of helioids coincided with the rise of modern electrical infrastructure, suggesting a deliberate transition. As history shows, what is presented as progress often masks the erasure of prior achievements.